The trail of the 3rd Army and the 19th Tactical Air Command of the 8th Air Force is marked by more than 40,000 white crosses, 40,000 dead Americans.
We were young and soldiers called to dedicate our lives in the name of God and country. Do what's just, boys. Go do what's right. A hot band of brothers waiting on our chance to add one more page unto the victory dance. Here am I, Lord, send me, send me. Victory lies in the spirit of the lives of the men who died for me.
Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I. Send me."
This is Michael Broderick, Marine Corps veteran, actor, and Gallant Few board member. You are listening to the New American Veteran. Now here's Carl Monger.
Welcome to the New American Veteran. I'm your host, Carl Monger, the founder and executive director of Gallant Few, and I am very proud to welcome Steve Maguire to the show today. Steve has been a friend of mine for many years. He himself is a veteran, Army veteran. He was blinded in combat, and he has written a couple of books. He's volunteered with some veteran organizations. He's worked with the VA, and he just wrote and released a new book. So, Steve, we're going to talk about all that stuff here just real quick, but welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Carl.
Hey, it's a privilege to have you on. You're always fun to talk with, and even more fun to be with in person. We've had a couple of beers together in the Fort Benning area, so I always appreciate that. Tell us a little bit about your background. You are an Army Ranger.
Absolutely. And a very important part of my life is being a Ranger. And I was probably the honor of my life was last year, the Army inducted me into the U.S. Army Ranger Hall of Fame. And
shame on me for not mentioning that when we did the introduction for you, but congratulations. That is an honor and well-deserved.
It certainly is. And like I said, it was a culmination for me in so many ways, because I had retired. I'll run through some of my background. I born in Providence, Rhode Island. I grew up in Rhode Island and Connecticut. And went to the Citadel, and left due to academic shortcomings at the beginning of my junior year.
No, I can't imagine that.
I went to a couple of other colleges and ran out of money, and then joined the Army in the very early 1967. And it had been my goal all along. It's why I went to military school. I wanted a military career. And I was enlisted. I went to our armor school and went to Germany as an enlisted guy, and was fairly successful. I'm 85 in 10 months. And I kind of had the Army figured out.
That's smoking.
And I loved it. And I left Germany to go to OCS. I had been on a waiting list for infantry OCS. And that's where I wound up. As soon as I got out of infantry OCS and got commissioned, I went to the Ranger Department. Not just to go to Ranger School, but to get a job as an RI. And I was in the patrolling committee. And in July.
What year was that, Steve?
What's that?
What year was that you went to the
That
regiment?
was mid '68, and I got commissioned 5th of July '68, and then went straight to the Ranger Department, and it was a job of my life. I enjoyed that immensely. I had a apartment in Columbus, Georgia, with another Ranger, and it was just a ball. Okay. From there, of course, I went straight to Vietnam. After about a year's time, I went to Vietnam and joined the 9th Division, first as a platoon leader in the 2nd Battalion, 39th Infantry. And then when the 9th started returning to the States, they were the first unit to be pulled out of Vietnam, first combat unit. I went to the 6th Battalion, 31st Infantry, and took over the recon platoon as a Ranger, and I really enjoyed that too. It was, you were commanding U.S. troops in combat, and you were out there doing Ranger stuff, and it was exciting. It was live fire, and they were trying to kill you seriously. And I could say that was a tremendous adventure, but it is indeed dangerous. I, of course, like so many young guys, thought that I was invulnerable. And the more experience I got in combat, the better I got, the more skills and the more clever I became. But, and that can help you, but the other side of that is the longer you're in combat, the longer you expose yourself, the more likely it is you're going to get it. And that's what happened to me.
Yeah, it's almost an odds game, right? The longer that you're there, the greater the odds go.
I really looked at it that way. Okay. I talked about that in the first book, Jungle and Black, which is sort of like the story of what happened to me. I wrote that book because people later on would say, "What happened to you? Were you born blind or something?" And the war was still going on, and I said to people, "No, I got blinded in Vietnam," and it was like, how could that be? It was like people were amazed, and I didn't think it was very amazing at all. Okay, we suffered tremendous casualties in the Vietnam War compared to Iraq and Afghanistan. Just look at the numbers. And they were also packed in to really just a few years, from 66 through about 70, where virtually all of the casualties were piled up.
So you were you were a reconnaissance platoon leader for how long?
Yes. Probably about 5 months.
Mm-hmm. And then you were hit while you were on a patrol. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. We were, tracking some enemy unit, and my point man stepped on a booby-trap, and I was right behind him. I had a point team of 2 men, and we were just looking at some evidence of where the enemy had been sleeping that night. There'd been about 20 of them sleeping, because you could see that where the grass was all pushed down, they'd been sleeping in some soft grass. And we were trying to figure out which direction they'd gone in, and just triggered a booby trap. And,
were you immediately blinded by the explosion?
Yes, I was. Yes. Yeah, I lost one eye immediately, and I detail this graphically in Jungle and Black. And then I lost all light perception immediately. I was wounded everywhere, multiple fragment wounds. I was standing when it went off, probably only 3 or 4 feet away from me. All right. It wasn't like some of these really powerful IEDs that you find in Afghanistan, which are capable of tearing people into bits. That probably may have been a 1 pound explosive, but powerful enough to wound all three of us for sure. And, we were lucky enough to get a medevac probably within 15 minutes. And then we were in surgery probably very shortly. So
did it take
helped.
you to recover from to go through the surgeries, and
yeah,
how long did you spend in the hospital?
I was in Vietnam for about a week in intensive care, and then they moved. They had a system in those days. They moved you, if you were seriously injured, they moved you to Japan. Okay, not like today where they whiz people through launch stool and then back to the States. Large numbers of patients were held in Japan. You didn't get to come home. Okay, some went to Okinawa, and then there were a couple of big evac hospitals in Japan. I went to a place called Camp Zama. It was a very large
I've been
hospital.
to Camp Zama. I played golf at Camp Zama.
Did you? It's still there. I think the hospital was closed a good number of years ago, but I think there's some Army function still operating there. I'm not sure. I looked it up a while back, but I stayed there for 5 or 6 weeks, and then they brought me, medevaced me to Walter Reed directly.
And while you were at Walter Reed, if I remember right, you shared a room with who would become one of my bosses down the road, kind of a fairly well-known Ranger.
And who was that?
Am I stumping you? He became President Clinton's drug czar.
Oh, Barry McCaffrey. Yeah, I didn't share a room with him, but he was right there on that ward. And I became friends with him at that point. And he was a captain, and I was when I arrived, I was still a first lieutenant, but I was promoted to captain a couple of months later, and that was a saga that I kind of talk about in Jungle and Black, the politics of all of that kind of stuff, and how they were dealing with soldiers then and how they deal with them now. Because see, my career in the Army ended at Walter Reed. I was a patient there for 15 months. And then from there, went to blind rehab with the VA. But the system got changed dramatically. And then when I returned to work for the Army as a civilian at Walter Reed again at the end of my career in 2007, things had changed dramatically. Everything was different in the way in which it was conducted.
Well, Steve, here we're going to take a real quick break, and I'm going to play a couple of commercials that pertain to Gallant Few, and then I want to come back and talk about your transition, your recovery, your transition. Maybe we can talk a little bit about what's different between transition for soldiers back then as opposed to transition now, because it certainly has changed, and I know you've seen both of it with your experience. And then we can go into talking about your book. Does that sound fair?
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll be right back.
The Spartan Pledge kind of looks like this, and then I'll give you the rundown of how it got started and how popular it's become. Not really popular, just effective. I will not take my own life by my own hand until I talk to my battle buddy first. My mission is to find a mission to help my warfighter family. That's the Spartan Pledge. It's nothing you have to memorize verbatim, but just get the gist of it. And that is, we don't kill ourselves until we talk to our battle buddy. And our mission in life is to have a mission that helps our warfighter family. About 3 years ago when it started between two guys, myself and my battle buddy, Nacho. We were in Iraq together, and we'd lost touch with each other. He called me one night when he was upset because a friend of his had committed suicide. Now, this guy, if I'm not mistaken, was a police officer at the time, but he was also a warfighter. He was a veteran. And that brought up the subject of suicide between us. And we realized that both of us had spent a lot of time thinking about suicide but not talking about it. And with the suicide rate in America being what it is today with warfighters, it's something that is a definite, relevant subject. Since then, I've taken that pledge with other warfighters, more than I can honestly remember. And now not too many people take that pledge with me because they've gone on to take that pledge with other guys, and it's just permeated throughout the community. Every guy I know that I took that pledge with has taken it with several other guys. It's been put on posters on Facebook and all over the place. And in my opinion, nobody owns it. We all own it. We all own a piece of it. We all have a piece of that, the Spartan Pledge, because it's something that means something. Because we don't trust the doctors. We don't even trust our family members. But we trust our battle buddies. So take that pledge with your battle buddy. And remember, if someone takes that pledge with you, that means you're taking it with them. Me, I'd have to contact a lot of people if I was going to off myself. And I would, because I took a pledge. That's the descendants of Sparta. That's what it's all about. That's what the Spartan Pledge is. If we can just do that, we don't need all the other stuff. We take care of ourselves, we take care of our own, and we maintain a mission focus. The Spartan Pledge. That's where it comes from, and you decide where it goes. Contact a battle buddy. Talk to him. Find out that what you realize and what you think is reality is not necessarily reality. We all are going through the same thing in silence. You don't have to sign a paper. You don't have to make a dedication online. It's just a phone call between two guys, two warfighters, male or female. Doesn't matter. I will not take my own life by my own hand until I talk to my battle buddy first. My mission is to find a mission to help my warfighter family. All the way. Make it happen.
Okay, and we're back with Steve Maguire to talk about his experience as an infantry platoon leader and ranger in Vietnam, being injured, his subsequent recovery, and then some of the books that he's written. So, Steve, welcome back. Let's talk about your recovery, your transition, and things that you've seen. What's different between transitioning soldiers from the Vietnam time frame and transitioning soldiers for today?
Well, back then, the structure was differently. You had every hospital had what was called a medical holding company, all right? And all the patients were in the medical holding company, all right? At Walter Reed, during the Vietnam War, you had perhaps 2,000 in a medical holding company. It was commanded by a medical service corps major and a couple of office staff, and that was it. Everybody was on their own in terms of just the doctors managing. There were no case managers or anything like that. The ward doctor managed everything. And you as a patient were completely subject to that system that was hanging by a thread. Medical holding companies were fine in peacetime because they had a few sick guys and a few injuries. That's all they had. But when there's a war, these things just blew up. A company, can you imagine? 2,000
in a medical holding company.
2,000. I recall somebody that worked at the medical holding company once, a personnel guy once telling me, he says, we've got over 2,000 in this company. On any given day, we don't know where 200 of them are. Now put yourself in that company commander's shoes. And in Jungle and Black, I talk about one time I went to a party down in Springfield, Virginia. And it was a pool party for myself and a couple of my friends and a bunch of flight attendants. Can you imagine that? All right. And that party lasted for 3 days. Well, I was a captain in the Army, and I thought I was out on my own recognizance. And it didn't register in my mind that somebody somewhere was accountable for where I was. I was an inpatient in the hospital, and they had lost an inpatient. Okay. And that was all the alarm bells were going off, and I didn't hear them. All right. But I did appreciate when I came back, and the company commander threatened me with an Article 15. But we got over that.
Some things never change, right?
No, they never change. Okay. What the Army did now is they got rid of the medical holding company, and they created these warrior transition units. Some are companies, some are battalions. At Walter Reed, we had a brigade. Okay. But the Warrior Transition Brigade consisted of only 2 companies. All right. Commanded by a colonel, by a full colonel. And they had a whole cadre of staff, squad leaders, and then they had case managers who were all Army Nurse Corps types, mostly Reserve and National Guard. And they tracked their rehabilitation in the hospital from the time they were an inpatient to the time they become an on-campus outpatient. All right. And that provided command and control and some continuity of care, that where everybody understood what was going on with the patient and all of the different appointments they might have. Everything was overseen. When I had an appointment in a hospital, they just told me I had an appointment and I went to it. I didn't realize a lot of guys just didn't even go. Okay, that was not in their interest, but the 60s Army was a draft army. There was a lot of, let's just say, command challenges that in today's Army you just don't have.
Yeah, well, they're totally different motivation when you're told you have to serve as opposed to volunteering to serve.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was I recall there was a phrase that people would use sometime when talking to a defiant soldier. They would say, "Go ahead, put me back on the block." What that meant was, I didn't ask to be here. They made me, they put this uniform on me, and they could just take it off and put me back on the block anytime they want. All right. Those are unique kinds of leadership challenges that in a volunteer army you really don't have. All right. I'm not saying you don't have wayward soldiers today, but not in the same way. Okay. And so I really saw that, and working at Walter Reed, it was very positive. Some of the things that I saw the same, though, where I saw myself again, was the identity. I identified as a soldier. It was who I was. And when the Army was going to retire me and put me out, my identity was being taken away from me. That's the way I felt. I saw that in a lot of soldiers today, where they had gotten seriously wounded. They too were going to be retired and put out of the Army, and they didn't know what they would be if once the Army was taken away from them.
Yeah, you lose your sense of purpose. Then
yes,
just getting through daily life and then dealing with injuries or whatever else you have to deal with, it becomes almost impossible.
That's right. So it was something that I really had to deal with. It was not just blindness. You know, God knows that's a certain challenge right there. Total blindness. I had no experience with that whatsoever. And I was facing the rest of my life that way. However, the bigger challenges for me, which I dealt with in Jungle and Black, was how do I deal with not being a soldier? Because it was who I was. If I can't be a soldier, then what am I now? Okay. And I didn't like any of those options. And then the other part was women, and I deal with that quite a bit too. And then, of course, that gets resolved. I got married in a hospital, at Walter Reed while I was a patient, and and have now been in 2 weeks. It'll be 47 years. So,
And congratulations.
thank you. I sort of like thought my way through this and put my successes into practice. And I preached that kind of thing when I was at Walter Reed working with younger soldiers, because I'd had the opportunity over several decades to see what worked for vets and what didn't. See what I'm saying?
Can you give me a couple examples of that? What in your opinion works best?
I think the most important part, and I became a psychologist and counselor and everything. I did not, by the way, I've never worked with the VA. I worked both for the U.S. Army in a number of capacities over the years, and then I worked in private nonprofits as well, and as a counselor, in the drug and alcohol field and a variety of social services. And in the late 70s, when the rise of PTSD came along, and I could see how destructive that was for a lot of people, I began to see that a lot of people began to tell themselves things that were destructive, tell themselves that they had a problem, and then they began to act accordingly. And I used to work through that with a lot of guys in group therapy, and a lot of people just didn't need to be doing a lot of the things that they were doing. They really didn't, and those were successful. They just they moved on from it. All right, I found that immersing myself in Vietnam was actually more helpful. I used to hear people say, "Oh, I don't want to talk about that. I just don't want to talk about it, and it's too painful." And then I found the opposite was much more useful for me. To talk about it, to associate with other vets who were also not just willing to talk, but were interested in the war and processing it, what their experiences were. And eventually it led me to the U.S. Army Ranger Association, because there
Hey, well, I want to ask you real quick about the processing of it. Do you see a difference between the veterans, the younger veterans today, being willing to share and process that information as opposed to Vietnam veterans, or is there a difference between the two?
I think there's a lot of similarities, and I think they're all bad. I think a lot of yeah.
Elaborate on that.
There's just too many who are either wallowing in the self-pity of PTSD and telling themselves a whole bunch of things that are bad for them. They don't realize that they are, because people don't want to do bad things to themselves, but that's in fact what they actually do. All right. And it was used when I joined the U.S. Army Ranger Association in the early 90s, after I returned from Europe, because Susie and my family and we were in Europe for 15 years. We came back, and I had just started doing the writing thing, because that was also very helpful to me. It was part of that process of not just delving into it, but really reliving my war experiences and not seeing them as some horror that war can certainly be and is, but that what it had done for me. What were the challenges that I had surmounted? What were my successes? What leadership lessons had I learned? What mistakes had I made that I could make sure I didn't do again. And those kinds of things are much more important to me. And I associated with a lot of guys that were Rangers who were my age from Vietnam. And the U.S. Army Ranger Association back then was heavily dominated by Vietnam era Rangers and guys who had fought in combat. They were all the real deal. They had been in combat. They had been Rangers in combat. And I wasn't dealing with there weren't any wannabes or guys that didn't share many of the same experiences. And also, they were dealing with the issues in much the same way as I was. So I found associating myself with those kind of guys, and you know many of them yourself, was important to me. All right. And then in 1990s.
One of the things that I've seen that in the work that I do now with a lot of these veterans is there is a reluctance to go and associate with that population because if they got injured or if they had a misbehavior or if they had a negative experience, then they assume that the rest of the community is going to ostracize them or make fun of them or call them not worthy. And or sometimes it's just too embarrassing and painful for them to go back.
Yeah, that's
we're able to
bad.
pull them in. Then it seems like it is much more of a healing experience. They really need to do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of that thinking that you just mentioned is bad thinking. All right, there may be some truth to it, but you've got to not think in those kinds of ways because that's the bad aspect. I saw this in back in the mid 90s. I did a couple of tours in 95 and 96 through the prison system of Ohio, in the state of Ohio. And I was dealing with incarcerated vets. Now, here's a population that have had some bad experiences. They're in a state penitentiary in Ohio, and they had Army experiences that were, let's just say, not always had been good.
Yeah.
Some of them had been good, though. They didn't get into trouble until they got out of the service. So it was a kind of a mixed bag. But a lot of them were processing information. They carried ideas around with them that were wrong, absolutely wrong. But what they were doing was acting accordingly. In other words, they held an idea that was wrong, and then made it right by acting accordingly. And it just screwed things up.
Reality.
Yeah, they guaranteed failure. Absolutely. So,
right, Steve, we're going to do one more short commercial break, and then when we come back, let's talk about your books and and how people can get a hold of those. Okay.
Okay.
So stand by.
They teach you a lot in the service. They teach you how to stand straight and fire your rifle. They teach you respect and survival. They teach you how to take a life and how to give your own. What they don't teach you is what happens when you come home. There are over 2 million people in the U.S. Armed Forces. For some, coming home is the hardest part. As a veteran, you are not alone. Reach out, call a battle buddy, and take the Spartan Pledge today. For more information, visit us on the web at descendantsofsparta.com.
Okay, Steve. So welcome back. Appreciate the opportunity to have you on the New American Veteran. Let's talk about your books. You already talked about Jungle in Black some. Where can people buy Jungle in Black? And I tell you, from personal experience, I read that a long time ago, right after I first met you. I still have a copy of it behind my desk. That is a great book. It really gives insight not only into the Vietnam War, but the warrior mindset and the things that you went through. So talk about that real quick, and then we'll go to the new book, Mekong Meridian.
Well, let me summarize. Jungle of Black, when it first came out back in 1992, I was very dissatisfied with what Bantam did with that book. After I retired, I rewrote the whole thing. And the exact same 20 chapters I rewrote and edited it in a proper way. And that's called Jungle in Black, the revised edition. That I want to tell you, I increased, because I had almost 20 years of feedback from people who'd read the first one. I knew what changes I really needed to make. And so I added an introduction to it as to why I had to revise it. And then it's at least 100 pages longer, simply because people wanted to know certain things that the original didn't tell. So I added that in. I still had all my notes and parts that I had cut out of it and everything. I also put in a glossary for a lot of the people who didn't understand the Vietnam era, who were much younger. They needed a glossary. So I put that in. I really enjoyed doing that. And then I have a epilogue, which goes from the time I got out of the hospital, retired from the Army, all the way up to my retirement from the Army as a civilian in 2013, and my move out to start a new life in Oklahoma.
And 40 photos.
And then we put in about 40 photographs that were not in the original book. So it's also in a trade paperback, not the mass market paperback. So it's a larger format book. And it just came out way better, and the reviews on Amazon were quite good.
Well, I saw that you had done a revision to it, but I didn't realize.
Yeah, revised edition. Okay, and I'm standing behind that one as the final word. On it is, you know, what happened to me and how did I get past a serious injury and a kind of thinking that I've implied here and talked a little bit about. But I wasn't done with Vietnam and this processing of what happened. It's very important to me. I was heavily influenced by my work at Walter Reed through the Iraq and Afghanistan war. What was happening to young soldiers now and where they were going in the future. I still needed to deal with a lot of those issues. So I sort of like created a character. I had a lot of true stories that didn't fit anywhere, and I wove them into a novel and created a character who, by the way, was a Ranger in the 9th Division in 1969, just like I was. But he's not exactly me. And he goes through a lot of challenges as well. All right. And it ends rather differently than it ended for me. However, it's still important. It's still, he speaks much of what I believe. In fact, just about everything he says is what I believe. And it was a way in which I could say things that were beyond the scope of Jungle in Black. Mekong Meridian just enabled me to fix up a lot of loose ends. Now, the book is just shy of 600 pages as well. So there's a lot of stuff in there. And there's a lot of humor, because humor is really important. I never saw the Army as some horrible thing that I had to get through or some horrible experience. The Army was just an adventure for me every single day.
You know, one of the things that I really like about it is focus on being historically accurate. So there's one scene where you open up a beer And as you're writing it, you don't explain why. You just say, I punched a couple of holes in the top of it to drink the beer. And most of today's, well, they don't even think about the fact that back in the 1960s and 70s, you didn't have pull tops on beers. That was an invention that, I don't know, Michelob or somebody came up with. It was like groundbreaking when it happened. But you actually had to use a can opener, punch a couple of holes in it, one for the air to flow in, the other for the liquid to flow out, or you weren't going to drink it. So I thought that was pretty darn cool that you focus on some of those small historical details that a lot of people don't know about or have forgotten.
You've got to be careful in writing about stuff because we take it for granted that so many things have happened in the meantime that you don't want to actually slip it back in that time. When we were in Vietnam, the pull tab, the throwaway pull tab had just come out, and the beer industry had an enormous amount of cans of beer stockpiled that didn't have pull tabs, and they sent them to Vietnam. We're talking about literally millions of cans of beer, millions, and they were not aluminum cans; they were steel cans. So they needed a church key to open, and that was one of the important things in Vietnam was that we had in my unit almost unlimited amount of beer, albeit 3.2% beer, but it was beer, and
that helped you hydrate better.
I believe it was really important because I talked to guys today about being in the Middle East and not having access to alcohol, and man, I don't want to go to war unless I can drink beer while I'm there. It's just that way.
Opens up another thing I want to ask you about. And I'm sure you've experienced this with your work through the Walter Reed system, alcohol and veterans. It seems like one of the biggest issues that get a little bit of feedback, so I'm going to hit the thing so it stays on me for a minute. One of the biggest issues that I work with veterans, especially those that have lots of combat deployments and combat experience, is a tendency to self-medicate with alcohol. And the VA throws a combat cocktail, they call it, of prescription meds at them, but they still can't sleep or they still can't relax. And so they go out and they drink to oblivion. And then they find it very, very difficult to stop that practice. I'm interested in your thoughts and comments on that.
Really complex. And because I was a drug and alcohol counselor for a number of years, I find it very complex. I'm a believer in the value of alcohol. At the same time, it's hugely dangerous. I only started reading last night. I started reading Jack London's John Barleycorn, and this was Jack London. In case people don't know, was a genius writer in the early 1900s, and he died of alcoholism at the age of 40. It's hugely dangerous. At the same time, I believed it was really important in Vietnam to be able to have soldiers after a combat situation sit around and drink beer and process what just happened. The camaraderie is very important. And I think that moderate amounts of alcohol can facilitate that. That's the way I see it. And can it be abused? Yes, it can be abused. And there are those who fall prey to abusing it much more readily than others, whether it was acquired or whether it's genetic in their family. Okay. People have to be very careful. Those who have certain predispositions to going overboard, they've got to be able to recognize that, be able to control it, and if they can't, they got to stop. They just can't do it. Okay, that's just the matter of fact. But most people, the overwhelming majority of people in this country, Drink quite moderately, socially, and have no trouble with that. All right. And I think it's important. All right. So I thought it was important in the Army. And when we have reunions and Rangers get together, we're all having drinks together. Are people falling down drunk? No, they're not. Okay. Because over those years, they've learned how to appropriately drink and enjoy the company of others and with drink. But I really enjoyed coming back from a combat operation and sitting around. We had a platoon bar, sitting around with the guys and drinking beer and talking about what it was we just did. Because not all the privates in a platoon fully understand what was going on when it was going on, because they're not on a radio with the battalion net, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So that was really important. So people had some understanding.
The attitude has really changed, because even when I was a brand new platoon leader, also in the 9th Infantry Division in the early 80s, we had a vending machine, a Coca-Cola machine next to the CQ desk going into the barracks, and it was stocked with beer. Quarter,
Okay.
you come into the barracks for a quarter, you get yourself cold beer, and that certainly has changed.
All gone.
Let's talk now about your book. How do people get your book? And I'll say, yeah.
Very easy. Both of them are available at Amazon. Jungle and Black's the revised edition, and then the novel just out is Mekong Meridian.
Right. How's it going so far with sales?
Pretty well, and with guys like you helping me out, it should go a lot better. But I think I've got a lot of ideas that are not commonly thrown around. I am not politically correct in the least, and far from it. So people will find a lot of humor in that, because they don't find a lot of those ideas floating around today commonly. All right. Some of the ideas about drinking, some of the ideas that I have about women, so all of those things are somewhat unusual today. But I believe in them completely. And people don't have to agree with me, of course, but that's the way it is. And I still love the Army. At my advanced age here, I still, and the things that I cherish about the Army were all the positive things. I don't worry about the negative things. Of course they existed, but I don't it's the positives. What did I get out of it? What did I learn that was good for me? It's sort of like in Jungle and Black, one time my mother blamed my Ranger tab for having gotten me blinded. And I said, Mom, you've got it half right. Ranger played a role in my getting wounded, for sure. But the ideals of what made me a Ranger is what's going to get me through this problem. And I made that come true. It's not that it just came true. I made it come true by embracing all of the things that made me a Ranger and focusing on those kinds of things. It was kind of like where I said, I'm on a lifelong night operation. But that's the way I look at it, and it's how I get through.
Steve, you're an amazing guy.
Thank you. It's what you tell yourself.
I'm going to put links for your books so people can go straight to Amazon to order your book. And it's really been a privilege to have you on the show. I always close out the show with taps. And so as the listener goes through the end of the show, please think about those who have served and given their lives. We're doing this interview on the anniversary of a Ranger that was killed in action. And so, just remember that there are those that are still in harm's way. Steve, thank you for being on the show. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for your leadership and in the veteran community and the Ranger community. And thanks for being my friend.
Hey, thank you very much, Carl, and it's been my pleasure.
This is Corey. He is a veteran. He proudly served the United States as an Army Ranger. When he was leaving the military life for civilian life, he decided to run from Fort Benning, Georgia to Indianapolis, Indiana, approximately 565 miles in 28 days. Why? To illustrate the difficult journey that a soldier has transitioning from military service to a civilian life. It is not as simple as taking off a uniform and starting a 9-to-5. So Corey set out to make a difference, and his friends and family chanted "Run, Ranger, Run" in support. And from this, Run, Ranger, Run was born. A 28-day event during the month of February where teams of up to 10 people, including men, women, and children, anywhere in the world, can run, ruck, bike, swim, walk, crawl, or row 565 miles to raise awareness for the challenges of veterans reintegrating back into society. Are you ready to get involved? Great. First, visit www.runrangerrun.com where you can register and either join or form a team. Make sure you tell all your friends, or follow the example of Phantom Military Lighting and get your organization and colleagues involved. Use smoke signals, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, email, megaphone, or any other way to get the word out. And raise awareness and money for Gallant Few, an organization dedicated to helping our heroes successfully transition from military service to a civilian life filled with hope and purpose. Then put on your Run Ranger t-shirt and get your running shoes ready. Attend a free kickoff event near you on the last Saturday in January. And Run, Ranger, Run. The best part? Run Ranger Run is a virtual event. You can participate from anywhere at any time. Indoors, outdoors, any terrain, night or day. The only limits are those that you set. So join your friends, family, Gallant Few, and Phantom Military Lighting in the Run Ranger Run Challenge this February and celebrate making a difference for our service members in transition.
That beautiful rendition of Taps is a public domain recording created and recorded by an employee of the United States government. It is open source and not under copyright protection. Kenny Thomas' song Send Me is used by permission of Kenny Thomas. Isaiah 6:8 was read by Tim Abel. Thank you, Michael Broderick, for the introduction. All work is original or used by permission. This has been a production of Gallant Few's The New American Veteran, a member of the Heroes Media Group. All rights reserved.